The engine is dead, the lead expert said. There is nothing left to save. Nobody in the room argued. Nobody questioned the conclusion. And yet the quiet single dad standing near the back of the garage felt a strange knot form in his stomach. Not because he thought the experts were incompetent, because he thought they were looking in the wrong place. The luxury automotive facility sat on the edge of downtown Chicago, its massive glass walls reflecting the gray afternoon sky. Inside, bright lights illuminated one of the most expensive vehicles anyone in the building had ever seen. Technicians surrounded the car. Tablets displayed diagnostic reports. Engineers reviewed data streams. Every screen seemed to tell the same story. Failure. Olivia Bennett stood beside the vehicle with her arms crossed. As the chief executive officer of a rapidly growing technology company, she was accustomed to solving difficult problems. She invested in innovation. She trusted expertise. She believed in preparation. Yet none of those things seemed capable of helping her now. "You are absolutely certain?" she asked. The lead engineer nodded. "We have checked everything." Another specialist stepped forward. "The internal damage is extensive. Repair costs would be unreasonable. Replacement is the only practical option." Olivia looked at the vehicle again. It was more than an expensive machine. It represented years of memories, years of effort, years of milestones. Hearing strangers dismiss it so casually felt surprisingly personal. Around the room, technicians exchanged sympathetic looks. The verdict seemed final. The conversation should have ended there. But near the back wall, a man wearing a simple maintenance uniform continued staring at the engine compartment. Ethan Carter had spent most of the afternoon replacing lighting fixtures in another section of the facility. He was not part of the diagnostic team. He was not invited into the meeting. In fact, most people barely noticed him. At 42 years old, Ethan had become accustomed to being overlooked. His work shirt carried traces of grease. His hands showed years of labor. Nothing about him suggested authority. Nothing about him suggested expertise. To most people, he looked exactly like what he was supposed to be. A maintenance worker finishing another ordinary day. Beside him sat his daughter, Emma, working on homework at a small table near the customer lounge. She often waited for him after school. The arrangement was not glamorous, but it worked. Ethan glanced toward the vehicle once more. Something felt wrong. Not the engine. The conclusion. He studied the faces surrounding the car. The confidence. The certainty. The complete absence of doubt. Emma noticed his expression immediately. "Dad?" she asked softly. Ethan looked down. "Yeah. You have that look." He smiled faintly. "What look?" "The one you get when you think something does not make sense." Ethan laughed quietly. "Do I have a look for that?" Emma nodded. "Definitely." The answer made him smile, but his attention drifted back toward the vehicle. The experts continued discussing replacement timelines, costs, logistics. Every solution assumed the engine was beyond saving. Every solution started with surrender. Olivia listened carefully, though disappointment lingered across her face. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the mood felt heavy. Final, like a door quietly closing. Then one engineer pointed toward a section of the engine assembly. "This confirms it." Several others nodded immediately. Ethan narrowed his eyes. For a brief moment, he stepped closer. Not enough to interrupt, just enough to see. The movement lasted only seconds. Yet something caught his attention. A detail so small nobody else seemed interested in it. Ethan stopped walking. His expression changed. Emma noticed. "What is it?" she whispered. Ethan remained silent. The rain continued falling. The experts continued talking. Olivia continued listening. But for the first time since the meeting began, Ethan's concern transformed into curiosity. Because hidden beneath the certainty filling the room was a question nobody had asked. And sometimes the most important answers begin with the questions everyone else ignores. The meeting should have ended. The experts had delivered their conclusion. The chief executive officer had received her answer. The vehicle's future seemed decided. Yet Ethan Carter could not stop thinking about the detail he had noticed. It sat quietly in the back of his mind, refusing to leave. Emma watched her father from across the customer lounge. She had seen this before. Whenever something captured his attention completely, the outside world seemed to fade away. "Dad?" she asked again. Ethan blinked. "Sorry. You were doing it." "Doing what?" Emma smiled. "Thinking too hard." That earned a small laugh. "Maybe." Across the garage, Olivia Bennett thanked the engineering team for their work. Her voice remained professional, but disappointment lingered beneath every word. The vehicle represented one of the most meaningful purchases she had ever made. Not because of its price, because of what it symbolized. It had been her reward after years of building a company from nothing. Seeing it declared beyond repair felt strangely personal. The engineers began gathering their tablets and reports. Several technicians moved toward the exits. The atmosphere carried the weight of finality. Ethan looked toward the engine one more time, then toward Emma, then back toward the vehicle. "What did you see?" Emma asked quietly. Ethan smiled faintly. "You always know when I see something. Because you get that look." He nodded. "Fair enough." Emma lowered her voice. "Was it important?" Ethan hesitated. Maybe. Maybe means yes. Ethan laughed softly. She was becoming far too good at reading him. Rain continued tapping against the giant glass walls surrounding the facility. The afternoon sky had darkened. Customers came and went through the showroom entrance while employees settled back into their routines. Life moved forward. Yet Ethan remained standing exactly where he was. Something about the engine report bothered him. Not the conclusion itself. The path used to reach it. Years ago, he might have spoken immediately. Years ago, he would have walked directly into the discussion and challenged assumptions. But life had taught him patience. It had taught him humility. It had taught him that being right and being heard were not always the same thing. He picked up his toolbox and started toward the maintenance office. Halfway there, a voice stopped him. "Excuse me." Ethan turned. Olivia Bennett stood nearby. "You work here?" she asked. "Maintenance department." Olivia nodded. "Thank you for helping keep this place running." Ethan smiled politely. "My pleasure." The conversation should have ended there. Instead, Olivia glanced toward the vehicle. "Shame about the car." Ethan followed her gaze. "Yeah." Olivia folded her arms. "I was hoping for different news." Ethan considered his words carefully. Sometimes different news takes longer to find. Olivia looked at him curiously. "What does that mean?" Ethan almost said nothing. Almost. Then he glanced toward the engine again. "Can I ask a question?" Olivia seemed surprised. "Sure." Ethan pointed toward the vehicle. "Did anyone review the original failure sequence?" Olivia frowned slightly. "I assume they did. The original sequence. Not the secondary damage." Olivia studied him for a moment. "Why?" Ethan shrugged. "Just curious." She followed his gaze toward the engine compartment. The question lingered between them. Not because it sounded revolutionary. Because it sounded specific. Very specific. "Are you saying they missed something?" Olivia asked. Ethan immediately shook his head. "I am saying I would want to know." Before she could respond, one of the senior engineers approached. "Ms. Bennett, we have the transport paperwork ready." Olivia nodded. "Thank you." The engineer noticed Ethan standing nearby and offered a brief professional smile before returning to business. Within seconds the moment passed. Olivia turned back toward Ethan. "Well, thank you anyway." Ethan nodded politely. "Good luck." She walked away. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Yet something about it stayed with her. Meanwhile, Ethan gathered his tools and headed toward the maintenance area. Emma followed closely beside him. "You almost told her." Ethan opened a storage cabinet. "Told her what?" "That they might be wrong." Ethan smiled. "I did not say that." Emma grinned. "You thought it." Ethan paused. Then he looked back toward the distant vehicle sitting beneath bright showroom lights. The experts believed the story was finished. The reports said the case was closed. The evidence seemed overwhelming. But deep inside, a single question continued refusing to disappear. And sometimes the difference between failure and a second chance begins with one person willing to ask the question nobody else considered. The next morning began like every other morning at the facility. Technicians arrived carrying coffee cups. Service advisors reviewed schedules. Customers checked messages while waiting for updates on their vehicles. The building buzzed with quiet efficiency. Yet for Ethan Carter, something felt different. The question from the previous afternoon still lingered in his mind. He tried to focus on routine maintenance tasks, replacing filters, inspecting lighting systems, organizing storage areas. But every time he walked past the showroom floor, his eyes drifted toward Olivia Bennett's vehicle. Emma noticed immediately. "Still thinking about it?" she asked while sitting at a corner table working on school assignments. Ethan smiled. "Maybe a little. That means a lot." He laughed softly. "You know me too well." Around noon, a group of engineers gathered near the vehicle again. New reports had arrived. Additional testing confirmed the original diagnosis. At least that was the official conclusion. Ethan watched from a distance while replacing a ceiling panel nearby. The lead engineer pointed towards several data charts displayed on a large monitor. The evidence is consistent. Another specialist nodded. Every result supports the same outcome. There is no realistic path forward. The confidence in their voices was unmistakable. Years earlier, Ethan might have challenged them. Years earlier, he would have stepped forward and asked difficult questions. But life had changed him. Becoming a single father had changed him. Loss had changed him. He no longer felt the need to prove himself. He simply listened. Olivia arrived shortly afterward. The disappointment on her face had not disappeared. If anything, it seemed heavier now. Any new developments? She asked. The lead engineer shook his head. Nothing that changes the recommendation. Olivia nodded slowly. Understood. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. Then she turned to leave. As she passed beneath the maintenance ladder where Ethan was working, something unexpected happened. A small diagnostic tablet slipped from a technician's cart and landed near her feet. Olivia picked it up automatically. Before handing it back, she glanced at the screen. Then she stopped. "What is this?" she asked. The technician looked over. "A backup report." Olivia frowned. "Why does this section look different from the others?" The technician hesitated. "Because it is unrelated." Ethan looked down immediately. His attention sharpened. Olivia continued reading. "Unrelated how? It does not affect the final diagnosis." Something about the exchange felt familiar. Too familiar. Ethan had noticed the same thing. The same isolated data stream. The same anomaly everyone seemed eager to dismiss. Olivia handed the tablet back, but remained thoughtful. "Interesting." The technician smiled politely. "Not really." Yet Ethan could tell she was not convinced. Later that afternoon, Emma joined him in a storage room while he organized equipment. "You saw it again, did not you?" she asked. Ethan looked up. "Saw what?" "The thing nobody else cares about." Ethan smiled. "Maybe." Emma closed her notebook. "Why not tell someone?" For a moment, he considered the question carefully. "Because being right is not enough." "What do you mean?" Ethan placed a wrench into a toolbox drawer. "People trust evidence." "You have evidence." "Not yet." Emma frowned. "Then what do you have?" Ethan paused. Then he smiled faintly. "A question." Outside the storage room, the facility continued operating normally. Customers arrived. Vehicles departed. Engineers reviewed data. The world moved forward exactly as expected. Yet beneath the surface, something was beginning to shift. Not because of a dramatic discovery. Not because of a sudden breakthrough. Because one unanswered question refused to disappear. Near closing time, Ethan walked past the vehicle again. The showroom lights reflected across its polished exterior. Most people saw a machine beyond saving. Most people saw an expensive mistake waiting to be replaced. Ethan saw something else. He saw a story that did not quite fit the evidence. And as he studied the engine compartment one final time before heading home, he noticed a detail he had missed before. It was small, almost invisible, easy to ignore, which was exactly why everyone else had overlooked it. The tiny detail bothered Ethan Carter so much that he arrived at the facility nearly an hour early the next morning. The city was still waking up. Streetlights glowed against the pale blue sky. Delivery trucks moved through quiet intersections. Inside the automotive center, only a handful of employees had arrived. The silence felt different from the busy noise that normally filled the building. Ethan preferred it that way. Quiet made thinking easier. He walked past the showroom floor carrying his coffee and paused beside the vehicle. No crowds, no engineers, no discussions, just the machine sitting beneath soft overhead lights. For several moments, he simply stood there, looking, listening, observing. Most people believed expertise meant having answers. Ethan had learned long ago that expertise often began with patience, the ability to sit with uncertainty longer than everyone else. A few minutes later, Emma entered carrying her backpack. "You came early." Ethan smiled. "So did you. I wanted to see the mystery engine." That made him laugh. "Mystery engine?" Emma nodded confidently. "That is what it is now." Ethan looked back toward the vehicle. "Maybe." Together they stood quietly for a moment. Then Ethan opened a maintenance access panel near the diagnostic equipment. He was not touching the vehicle. He was reviewing facility monitoring logs connected to service-based systems. Information most people ignored. Information most people never needed. Yet sometimes small clues hid in unexpected places. As he reviewed timestamps, something caught his attention. He stopped scrolling, then looked again. Emma immediately noticed. "You found something." Ethan remained silent. The timestamp did not match the sequence described in the official reports. Not by much. Only a few minutes. Yet those few minutes changed the order of events. And if the order was wrong, the conclusion might be wrong too. "Dad?" Emma asked. Ethan leaned back slowly. "Interesting." "Good interesting?" "Very interesting." Before he could say more, footsteps echoed across the showroom. Several engineers had arrived. Their morning meeting would begin soon. Ethan closed the monitoring system and stepped away. Not because he lacked confidence. Because he still lacked proof. Questions were valuable. Evidence mattered more. By mid-morning, Olivia Bennett returned for another update. She appeared tired. The previous days had clearly weighed on her. The lead engineer greeted her with a professional smile. "We are preparing final recommendations." Olivia nodded. "I expected that." Ethan happened to be replacing a ceiling sensor nearby. Close enough to hear the conversation. Far enough to remain unnoticed. The engineers continued discussing replacement options. Costs. Timelines. Procurement schedules. Everything assumed the same conclusion. Yet now Ethan knew something they did not. The timeline supporting their diagnosis contained a flaw. A small flaw. But small flaws often led to large discoveries. As the meeting ended, Olivia remained behind reviewing paperwork. Ethan climbed down from the ladder and gathered his tools. He hesitated. Then he made a decision. "Ms. Bennett." Olivia looked up. "Ethan, right?" He nodded. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." Ethan chose his words carefully. "If someone found information that challenged the original timeline, would you want to know?" Olivia stared at him for a moment. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether the information is reliable." Ethan smiled faintly. "Fair answer." Olivia crossed her arms. "Do you think there is something wrong with the timeline?" Ethan glanced toward the vehicle. "I think there might be a missing piece." Before she could respond, one of the engineers returned carrying additional reports. The moment disappeared again. Yet this time Olivia did not seem ready to let it go. Throughout the afternoon, she found herself thinking about the maintenance worker's question. Missing piece. Not wrong. Not impossible. Just incomplete. Meanwhile, Ethan continued working. Fixing lights. Checking systems. Completing ordinary tasks. Anyone watching would have assumed he had moved on. Emma knew better. She found him later reviewing facility records during a break. "You are still looking." Ethan smiled. "Always." Emma sat beside him. "Are you getting closer?" Ethan looked through another report, then suddenly stopped. His eyes narrowed. There it was. Not a theory. Not a suspicion. A pattern. Small. Hidden. Easy to miss. The exact detail he needed. For the first time since the experts declared the engine beyond saving, Ethan felt certainty replace curiosity. And as he quietly closed the file and looked toward the showroom floor, he realized the story everyone believed was about to change. For the first time since the entire situation began, Ethan Carter was no longer chasing a possibility. He was holding evidence. Not enough evidence to convince an engineering team. Not yet. But enough to prove that the story everyone believed contained a flaw. He sat alone in the maintenance office after closing time, reviewing records one final time. Outside, the city lights reflected against the glass walls of the facility. Most employees had gone home. The showroom stood quiet. Only a few security lights illuminated the vehicle resting beneath its display platform. Emma sat nearby finishing homework. Every few minutes, she glanced toward her father. She knew that expression. Focused. Calm. Certain. "You found it, did not you?" she finally asked. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Maybe." Emma laughed. "That means yes." Ethan smiled. "It means I found enough to ask a better question." "What question?" Ethan turned his monitor slightly. "What if the engine was never the original problem?" Emma looked confused. "Would that change everything?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It could." The next morning arrived with unusual energy. News of the vehicle's upcoming replacement had already spread through parts of the facility. Engineers finalized paperwork. Suppliers prepared estimates. Everyone assumed the process was moving toward its inevitable conclusion. Everyone except one person. Around 10 o'clock, Ethan saw Olivia Bennett crossing the showroom floor. She appeared exhausted. Days of disappointing news had clearly taken their toll. Before he could reconsider, he approached her. "Ms. Bennett." Olivia stopped. Ethan. He nodded. Do you have a few minutes? Something in his voice made her pause. I can make a few minutes. They moved toward a quieter conference room overlooking the service area. Rain clouds drifted across the skyline outside. The atmosphere felt calm, professional. Ethan placed several printed reports on the table. Olivia studied them carefully. What am I looking at? Ethan pointed toward a series of timestamps. These are facility monitoring records. Olivia frowned slightly. From the service bay? And diagnostic systems. She looked back at him. Why? Ethan took a breath. Because the sequence of events does not match the conclusions. For several seconds, neither spoke. Olivia reviewed the documents again. Explain. Ethan remained measured. He did not rush. He did not dramatize. He simply walked through the evidence. The original failure event. The system responses. The timing discrepancies. The overlooked anomaly. Piece by piece, the story began changing shape. Olivia listened without interruption. By the time Ethan finished, she looked very different from when the conversation started. Not convinced. Curious. You believe the engine was misdiagnosed? Ethan shook his head. I believe the engine was blamed for something else. Olivia stared at the reports. Can you prove it? Ethan hesitated, then answered honestly. I think I can. At almost the same moment, several engineers entered the showroom for another review session. Olivia gathered the documents and walked directly toward them. Ethan followed at a distance. Emma watched from across the room, her heart racing. The lead engineer looked surprised when Olivia interrupted the meeting. We need to discuss something. He glanced at the papers in her hands. What is it? Olivia placed the reports on the table. A new perspective. The engineer skimmed the documents. His expression changed immediately. Not concern. Skepticism. These records came from maintenance systems. Correct, Olivia said. They are not diagnostic reports. Ethan remained silent. Another engineer joined the discussion. With respect, this does not change the original findings. Perhaps not, Olivia replied. But I want the timeline reviewed again. The room grew noticeably quieter. One specialist shook his head. We have already reviewed everything. Then review it once more, Olivia said calmly. The engineer looked toward Ethan for the first time. Really looked at him. The maintenance uniform. The toolbox nearby. The man standing quietly behind the discussion. And this idea came from him. The question carried no hostility. Yet it carried something else. Doubt. Familiar doubt. Ethan recognized it immediately. He had seen it many times before. Olivia looked toward Ethan. Then back at the engineering team. Yes. Silence settled across the room. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the windows again. Inside, every expert remained unconvinced. Every report still favored the original conclusion. Yet for the first time since the engine had been declared beyond saving, the certainty filling the room had begun to crack. And sometimes a second chance does not begin when people believe you. It begins when they agree to look one more time. The second review began that same afternoon. Engineers gathered around diagnostic stations. Additional data streams were pulled from archived records. Reports were reopened. Assumptions were challenged. What had seemed settled only hours earlier suddenly became uncertain. Nobody was happy about it. Experts prefer confidence. Confidence is comfortable. Questions are not. Ethan Carter understood that better than most. He stayed out of the way while the engineering team worked. The last thing he wanted was attention. The last thing he wanted was recognition. He simply wanted the truth. Emma sat nearby watching the room carefully. They still do not believe you, she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. They do not need to believe me. Then what? They need to follow the evidence. Across the showroom floor, Olivia Bennett observed the process with growing curiosity. For the first time since the diagnosis had been delivered, she noticed something unusual. The engineers were no longer discussing solutions. They were discussing possibilities. The certainty that once filled the room had softened. Questions replaced conclusions. One engineer leaned toward a monitor. Run that sequence again. Another technician nodded. Already doing it. Check the original system responses. Working on it. The atmosphere had changed completely. As evening approached, several specialists remained at their stations long after their normal schedules ended. Olivia walked toward the lead engineer. Anything? He rubbed his eyes tiredly. Not yet. But... The engineer hesitated. There are inconsistencies. Olivia folded her arms. Meaning we may have focused on the wrong event. The answer sent a quiet wave of emotion through her. Not excitement. Hope. Small. Fragile. Hope. Nearby, Ethan continued working on ordinary maintenance tasks, replacing a damaged light fixture, inspecting electrical systems, completing paperwork. Anyone entering the facility would have assumed he had nothing to do with the discussion unfolding around him. In many ways, he preferred it that way. Around 7 o'clock that evening, Emma closed her school notebook. Are we staying late? Ethan glanced toward the engineering bay. Looks like it. Emma smiled. I brought snacks. That made him laugh. Smart planning. Outside, darkness settled across the city. Rain had stopped. The windows reflected rows of bright showroom lights. Inside, the vehicle remained exactly where it had been all week. Yet the story surrounding it continued changing. Hour by hour, question by question. Near 8 o'clock, an engineer suddenly stood from his workstation. Wait. The word immediately drew attention. Several people turned. What is it? Another specialist asked. The engineer pointed toward his monitor. This response should not be here. Silence followed. More technicians gathered around. Data was reviewed, compared, rechecked, then reviewed again. Olivia stepped closer. Talk to me. The lead engineer studied the screen carefully. His expression revealed something she had not seen all week. Uncertainty. The failure sequence does not start where we thought it did. Olivia looked toward Ethan instinctively. He remained across the room, unaware of the attention slowly shifting in his direction. Another engineer spoke. If this data is correct, the engine may have been responding to another problem. Exactly. The room grew quiet again. Not because anyone had reached a conclusion, because everyone understood what the possibility meant. The entire diagnosis could be wrong. Hours passed. Coffee cups accumulated across workstations. Reports covered conference tables. Yet nobody left. For the first time, genuine curiosity had replaced routine procedure. Shortly before midnight, Olivia found Ethan reviewing maintenance schedules near a storage area. You knew? Ethan looked up. I suspected. There is a difference. A very big difference. Olivia smiled despite herself. Most people would have told everyone they were right. Ethan shrugged. Being right too early is dangerous. Olivia laughed softly. That sounds like experience talking. Ethan's smile faded slightly. Maybe. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Olivia looked toward the engineering bay where specialists continued reviewing data. Do you think the engine can actually be saved? Ethan considered the question carefully. I think it deserves a fair chance. The answer stayed with her long after she walked away. Because beneath all the reports, all the expertise, and all the uncertainty, that was what this situation had become. A question about second chances. And as the night grew deeper and the engineers continued uncovering details nobody had noticed before, the possibility of one second chance began feeling more real than anyone had imagined. The following morning, the atmosphere inside the facility felt completely different. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew something important had changed. The certainty that once surrounded the diagnosis was gone. In its place stood questions. Real questions. The kind that forced people to look again. Engineers arrived earlier than usual. Additional specialists joined remote calls. Diagnostic records were projected onto larger screens. Every piece of information connected to the vehicle was being reviewed from the beginning. Olivia Bennett stood near the center of the showroom, watching it all unfold. Just days earlier, she had been preparing to authorize a replacement. Now she found herself waiting for answers she never expected to hear. Across the room, Ethan Carter quietly started his morning tasks. He checked maintenance logs, replaced a damaged sensor, organized equipment in a storage area. To an outside observer, he looked completely disconnected from the discussion consuming the building. Emma knew better. She sat nearby reading while keeping one eye on her father. You are pretending not to pay attention, she said. Ethan smiled. Maybe. You are definitely paying attention. He laughed softly. A little. Around noon, a sudden wave of activity swept through the engineering team. Several specialists gathered around a central workstation. Voices grew louder. Data appeared on multiple screens simultaneously. Olivia immediately noticed. What happened? She asked. The lead engineer looked up. For the first time since this entire process began, excitement replaced confidence. We found the trigger. Olivia stepped closer. The trigger. The original event. The room fell silent as everyone listened. The engineer pulled up a series of reports. The engine was responding to a cascading system issue. Another specialist nodded. The damage pattern matches the response, not the cause. Olivia stared at the screen, meaning the lead engineer took a breath, meaning the engine itself may never have been the primary failure point. Complete silence followed. Ethan looked up from across the room, but said nothing. Emma smiled immediately. She did not fully understand the technical explanation. She understood her father's expression. That was enough. Olivia folded her arms. How confident are you? The engineer glanced at his colleagues, then back at her. Much more confident than we were 3 days ago. A few nervous laughs spread through the room. The irony was impossible to ignore. The experts who once sounded completely certain now spoke carefully, thoughtfully, humbly. Additional testing began immediately. Hours passed. New results continued arriving. One after another, they pointed toward the same conclusion. The original diagnosis had focused on symptoms, not the source. Ethan spent most of the afternoon fixing a lighting control panel in another section of the facility. He intentionally stayed away from the discussions, not because he lacked interest, because he respected the process. The engineers needed space to reach the truth themselves. Around 4 o'clock, Olivia approached him. You knew? Ethan looked up from his toolbox. I suspected. Olivia smiled. You keep saying that. Because it is true. Most people would be celebrating right now. Ethan closed the toolbox. There is nothing to celebrate yet. Olivia shook her head slightly. You really are different. Before Ethan could respond, one of the engineers hurried across the showroom. Ms. Bennett. Olivia turned immediately. What is it? The engineer's expression said everything before he spoke. You should see this. Minutes later, nearly every specialist stood around the main diagnostic display. New test results filled the screen. Every major concern that had justified replacing the engine was being reevaluated. The data no longer supported the original conclusion. The lead engineer looked toward Olivia, then toward Ethan. Finally, he exhaled. I think he was right. Nobody spoke. Not because they disagreed, because they understood the significance of those words. A maintenance worker. A single father. A man nobody considered part of the engineering team. He had noticed what an entire room of experts missed. Yet Ethan remained exactly the same. No smile of victory. No dramatic reaction. No need to prove anything. Emma watched proudly from across the room. Olivia noticed. So did the engineers. And in that moment, something even more important than the technical discovery began to happen. Respect. Genuine respect. Not because Ethan had embarrassed anyone. Not because he had defeated anyone. Because he had quietly reminded everyone of a truth that experience sometimes makes people forget. Expertise matters. Humility matters too. And as the final wave of data continued confirming what Ethan had seen from the very beginning, the entire story surrounding the vehicle began moving toward a conclusion nobody had imagined possible. The discovery changed everything. Not overnight. Not in some dramatic flash of celebration. The transformation happened more quietly than that. It appeared in conversations, in expressions, in the way people looked at Ethan Carter when he walked through the facility. For days, he had been the maintenance worker asking uncomfortable questions. Now he had become the man whose questions saved an entire project. Yet Ethan behaved exactly as he always had. He arrived early, completed his tasks, helped co-workers when needed, picked Emma up after school. Nothing about him changed, which only made everyone more curious. 3 days after the revised diagnosis, the engineering team gathered for another review meeting. New tests had confirmed the same conclusion repeatedly. The engine itself was not beyond saving. The original failure source had been isolated. A repair strategy now existed. Expensive, complex, time-consuming, but possible. Very possible. Olivia Bennett sat at the head of the conference table reviewing the latest reports. Around her, specialists discussed timelines and repair procedures. For the first time, optimism replaced frustration. Then one engineer asked the question everyone had quietly been wondering. Who exactly is Ethan Carter? The room grew still. Olivia looked up from the report. What do you mean? The engineer shrugged. Nobody sees a maintenance worker identify something an entire team missed every day. Several people nodded. Nobody intended disrespect. They simply wanted an explanation. Later that afternoon, Olivia found herself searching through old company records and public archives. Curiosity had finally overcome patience. The results surprised her immediately, then shocked her, then left her staring silently at her computer screen. Ethan Carter had not always worked maintenance jobs. Years earlier, he had been one of the most respected engine systems specialists in the country. Technical journals referenced his work. Industry conferences featured his presentations. Development teams sought his advice. His name appeared alongside major engineering projects across the automotive industry. Olivia continued reading. The deeper she looked, the more extraordinary the story became. Then she found the turning point. Several years earlier, Ethan's wife had passed away after a long illness. Shortly afterward, he disappeared from the industry. No dramatic announcement. No public explanation. He simply stepped away. Interviews ended. Consulting contracts stopped. Speaking engagements vanished. The brilliant engineer everyone expected to lead major projects chose something else instead. Raising his daughter. Olivia sat quietly for several minutes. Suddenly everything made sense. The patience. The humility. The absence of ego. Ethan no longer cared about proving himself because life had already taught him what truly mattered. That evening, Emma sat beside her father in the customer lounge while he reviewed maintenance schedules. The facility felt different now. Employees greeted him warmly. Engineers stopped to ask questions. Technicians sought his opinion. Respect followed him everywhere. Emma noticed. "You are famous." Ethan laughed immediately. "Definitely not. People keep asking for your help." "That is different." Emma smiled. "Not really." Before Ethan could respond, Olivia approached. "Do you have a minute?" Ethan looked up. "Sure." They moved toward a quiet corner overlooking the showroom floor. Evening sunlight filtered through the glass walls, casting long reflections across polished vehicles. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Olivia held up a printed article. An old industry publication. Ethan recognized it immediately. "You found that?" Olivia nodded. "I found a lot more than that." Ethan smiled softly. "The internet remembers everything." Olivia studied him carefully. "Why did you never tell anyone?" Ethan looked through the glass toward Emma. She was reading a book while waiting for him to finish. "Because it was not important." Olivia shook her head. "It seems important." Ethan smiled. "Not compared to her." Olivia followed his gaze. Suddenly the story felt less like a mystery and more like a lesson. Success had once defined Ethan's life. Then something more important arrived. Responsibility. Family. Love. Sacrifice. He had not lost his talent. He had simply chosen where to spend it. As the sun continued setting beyond the city skyline, Olivia realized something else. The most remarkable part of Ethan's story was not that he had been right. It was that he never needed recognition for being right. And while the engineering team prepared for the final repair process that now seemed entirely possible, a different kind of respect continued growing throughout the building. The kind earned not through titles or accomplishments, but through character. The kind that stays long after people forget your job description. The day of the final test arrived beneath a clear autumn sky. Sunlight poured through the towering glass walls of the facility, casting long reflections across the showroom floor. Employees arrived earlier than usual. Engineers gathered around diagnostic stations. Technicians moved carefully between work areas. Nobody admitted feeling nervous, but the tension was impossible to miss. Weeks earlier, everyone believed the story had already ended. Now they were about to discover how it truly ended. Olivia Bennett stood near the vehicle with a quiet expression. The repair process had been completed. The overlooked problem had been corrected. Every system had been inspected repeatedly. Every test had been verified. All that remained was a single moment. Across the room, Ethan Carter was replacing a light fixture near the customer lounge. The sight seemed almost absurd. The man whose observation changed everything was doing the same humble work he had done before any of this began. Emma sat nearby, watching both her father and the vehicle. She smiled every time she noticed engineers glancing toward Ethan. Respect had become impossible to hide. "You are not even going to watch?" she asked. Ethan looked down from the ladder. "I can hear it from here." Emma laughed softly. "That is such a dad answer." Ethan grinned. "Probably." Near the center of the showroom, the lead engineer prepared for the final startup sequence. The same engineer who had once declared the situation hopeless now looked noticeably different. More careful, more thoughtful, more humble. Olivia noticed it too. Experience had taught everyone something valuable. Confidence mattered. Humility mattered more. The room gradually grew quiet. Conversations stopped. Tools rested on workbenches. Employees gathered nearby. Nobody wanted to miss the moment. The lead engineer nodded. "Ready." Another specialist confirmed the final readings. Ready. Olivia folded her arms and took a slow breath. Then she looked across the room. Ethan happened to glance up at the same moment. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. The engineer initiated the startup sequence. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the system responded. Diagnostic screens illuminated. Data streams appeared. The vehicle came to life exactly as it should have. Smooth, stable, healthy. The room remained silent. Not because anyone was disappointed. Because everyone was stunned. Weeks of certainty had vanished in the face of truth. The impossible repair had become reality. The lead engineer stared at the monitors. Another specialist checked readings again. Then again. Every result confirmed the same conclusion. The vehicle was fully operational. A quiet wave of relief spread across the room. Then came applause. Not loud. Not dramatic. Genuine. Employees smiled. Engineers shook hands. Technicians laughed. Olivia closed her eyes briefly before looking toward Ethan. He had already climbed down from the ladder and returned to organizing tools. As if nothing remarkable had happened. Olivia walked across the showroom floor until she reached him. The room gradually grew quiet again. Ethan. He looked up. Yeah. Olivia smiled. Thank you. Simple words. Honest words. Ethan nodded politely. You are welcome. Olivia shook her head slightly. Most people would have spent weeks reminding everyone they were right. Ethan glanced toward Emma. That never seemed very useful. A few people nearby smiled. The lead engineer approached next. For a moment, he seemed unsure what to say. Then he extended his hand. I owe you an apology. Ethan accepted the handshake immediately. No, you do not. We dismissed your perspective. Ethan smiled gently. You followed the information you had. The engineer laughed softly. You make it very difficult to feel guilty. Good. More laughter followed. The tension finally disappeared. Emma watched the exchange with quiet pride. Then she walked over and slipped her hand into her father's. Ethan looked down. What? Emma smiled. I was just thinking. About. She glanced around the showroom. The engineers. The vehicle. The people who now respected her father. Then she asked the question that had lived quietly inside her since the beginning. Were they wrong? Ethan thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. No, Emma looked surprised. Ethan smiled warmly. They just did not know the whole story yet. For a second, nobody spoke. The words seemed to settle across the room. Because they applied to far more than an engine. They applied to people too. We rarely know the whole story. Not about strangers. Not about quiet fathers. Not about the people we overlook every day. The afternoon sunlight continued filling the showroom as life slowly returned to normal. Engineers returned to work. Customers arrived. Phones rang. Yet something had changed. Respect now occupied a space where assumptions once lived. And as Ethan and Emma walked toward the exit together, side by side beneath the golden light, the greatest victory was not that an engine had been saved. It was that character, patience, and quiet dignity had been seen for what they truly were. If this story reminded you of someone who kept doing the right thing even when nobody noticed, share that memory in the comments. And if stories about resilience, grace, and second chances speak to your heart, we would be honored to have you join us again for another journey.